The house you live in belongs to the whole family, right? I will never forget the face of my sister Elise, who said that with a radiant smile, as if she were declaring some universal truth. Those words turned 20 years of hard work and blood-stained sacrifice into dust in a single second. That day, I was sitting in the dining room of my parents' house. It was our monthly weekend family dinner. Steam rose from my mother's signature roast chicken, and the cheap red wine my father had opened in high spirits shimmered inside his glass. Across the table, my sister Elise and her husband Cole were busy tending to their 2 children, chatting about nothing in particular. It was an ordinary evening, but for me, once upon a time, it had been a peaceful and precious moment. Everything began to go wrong halfway through the meal. During a conversation about work, my father turned to me and asked, "By the way, is business going well?" "Yes, thanks to everyone's support. We've secured a big contract and the business is stable. And also..." I paused for a breath, then naturally brought up the piece of news I had been keeping to myself. I had no intention of boasting. I only wanted to share my relief with my family. The relief of finally being freed from the heavy chain I had carried for so long. Actually, last month I finally finished paying off the mortgage. 20 years. It was a long road, but at last, the house is completely mine. In that instant, the cheerful clatter of the dining room fell silent as if it had been a lie. In the stillness where time itself seemed to stop, the only sound was the high-pitched clang of my 7-year-old nephew dropping his fork onto his plate. The first to speak wasn't my father, surprisingly. What came from his mouth was less a word of praise than a sigh of resignation, as if he already foresaw the trouble to come. "I see. Well, that's quite something." My mother said, "That's wonderful," but her eyes flicked toward Elise, as if to say, "Please, not now." Then, trying to mask the tension, she hurriedly returned to wiping her grandchild's mouth. They knew. They all knew that this peaceful meal was about to reach its end. And it was, of course, my sister Elise who shattered the frozen air. "Wow, that's amazing. Wait a second. Does that mean the house is completely free now? Like, no mortgage, no liens, nothing?" I didn't miss the way her eyes gleamed, sharp and hungry, like a predator that had just found its prey. Next to her, Cole exclaimed cheerfully, "No way, Vanessa! You get to live in that mansion and only pay property tax? That's insane." But Elise's interest was on a completely different level. She placed her knife and fork onto her plate with a sharp clink and leaned forward across the table. Then, as if seeking agreement from the rest of the family, she spoke clearly. "Then that means the house isn't just your personal asset anymore, right? It's our family's shared property now, isn't it?" Those words were a declaration of war. I quietly set my wine glass down on the table. Feeling the chill spreading through my fingertips, I forced my voice to remain calm. "Elise, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't make bad jokes. That house is my personal property, bought with the money I earned at my company. Nothing more, nothing less." Elise shrugged her shoulders in exaggerated innocence. "I'm not joking. We're family, aren't we? Helping each other in hard times is what families do. You're single and don't even use half of that big house. We're struggling with 2 kids in a tiny, overpriced apartment. Isn't it obvious who could make better use of that place?" At that absurd logic, I quietly replied, "If you have that much to complain about, maybe you should try cutting back on a few luxuries. That watch on your wrist looks pretty expensive." Elise gently stroked her wristwatch, as if it were something precious. "This? Oh, this was a graduation gift from Mom and Dad. You spent your money on your motorcycle back then, but I've always liked nice things like this. Not that I could afford anything this lovely since getting married." At those words, my mother, who had been silent until then, spoke up hesitantly. "Vanessa, maybe you could at least think about what Elise is saying. Just imagine how happy Dylan and Tessa would be if they could play in that garden." "Mom, what are you saying?" My voice rose before I could stop it. I couldn't believe those words came out of her mouth. When I looked at my father, he averted his gaze awkwardly and drank his wine in silence. That silence was his quiet agreement with her. I realized then that I was completely alone. Elise, sensing her parents' support, smiled triumphantly. "See? Mom and Dad understand. You're successful in business, Vanessa. Buying another house wouldn't be hard for you, right? Sharing a little for your family wouldn't hurt anyone." "Sharing?" I let out a cold laugh. "Sharing, you say?" Do you have any idea what every pillar and every brick of that house is made of? They're built from my 20 years of blood and sweat, and from all the time you spent living comfortably while I was working to create it. Are you seriously telling me to share that? My voice was quiet but hard as steel, and the children flinched in their seats. But there was no stopping me anymore. My words sliced through the air of the dining room like a blade of ice. The confident smile vanished from Elise's face, replaced by an ugly look of anger. What's with that attitude? Blood and sweat? Don't exaggerate. You turned your hobby into your job and lived however you wanted. However I wanted? I laughed through my nose. For the first 5 years after I founded Apex Velocity Motors, I didn't take a single day off. While you were out picking your wedding dress with Cole, I was covered in oil and mud fixing other people's bikes until midnight. Confronted with the truth, Elise was struck speechless. I turned toward the two people who held the key to this farce. My parents. Dad, Mom, do you really think Elise's absurd logic makes any sense? You're honestly telling me to hand over the house I spent 20 years building to someone who hasn't lifted a finger to earn it? My father finally spoke, his voice heavy. Vanessa, Elise and Cole have children. You're on your own, but they have a future. Try to see it like an adult. Those words severed the last remaining thread of connection in my heart. I had nothing left to say. I see. So that's your answer. I stood up quietly. I placed my napkin on the table and picked up my handbag. There was no anger or sadness left in my movements, only the cold resignation of someone who finally understood everything. All right, now I know exactly what the word family means to you. My mother called out, "Wait," in a panic, but I spoke without turning around, my hand on the doorknob. No, Mom, the conversation's over. Forever. I closed the door of my parents' house behind me. The dull thud that followed marked the end of my old life. I sped down the coastal road on my beloved vintage Harley, returning to my own fortress. After parking the bike in the garage, I opened the heavy teakwood door and stepped inside. The living room was wrapped in silence. Beyond the window, the night sea stretched out endlessly, calm and unbroken. This was the culmination of my effort. My sanctuary, untouchable by anyone. I brewed a cup of coffee and sank into the sofa, when suddenly my smartphone began to vibrate wildly inside my handbag. The screen lit up, overflowing with incoming calls and messages. Dad, Mom, Elise, Cole, and even distant relatives, an aunt and cousins who almost never reached out. They all came at me at once, like a single organism moving to attack. When I opened the messaging app, a flood of venomous words filled the screen. My sister called me a heartless woman. My father condemned me, saying, "I didn't raise you to be like this." My mother cloaked her guilt in kindness, pleading, "Do the right thing for the family." And finally, even my aunt, who had barely spoken to me in years, accused me through hearsay. "You got successful and abandoned your family." They were trying to paint me as a greedy, cold-hearted woman who had drowned in her own success and cast her family aside. An ordinary person might have broken down under such an onslaught, crying in despair. Or perhaps they would have fired back in anger, dragged into a swamp of emotional conflict. But I am Vanessa, 48 years old, CEO of Apex Velocity Motors, a business owner who has weathered countless troubles and absurd complaints. I took a sip of my coffee and calmly began operating my phone. I turned off all notifications and started taking screenshots of every message. One by one, carefully. Sender, timestamp, content. No emotion, just evidence. The blades of words they hurled at me would, ironically, become the strongest shield to protect my fortress. When I finished gathering the evidence, I stood by the window in the living room. Why do they think they can twist someone else's life so easily to fit their own convenience? The answer is simple. Because they don't know the real story of my life. Images from 20 years ago flashed through my mind. A small rented warehouse that reeked of oil. That was where Apex Velocity Motors was born. My father sneered, "A woman like you could never run a motorcycle shop." And Elise had laughed at my dream. They could never understand what kind of magic I saw in a mere block of metal. What I wanted to deliver wasn't just a vehicle. It was that exhilarating freedom you feel when cutting through the wind. That oneness when the pulse of the engine syncs perfectly with your own heartbeat. And that breathtaking beauty when a machine, polished with devotion, gleams in the morning sun. I wanted to share that feeling with as many people as possible. That was my one and only shining goal. Even when the bank loan officer laughed and said, if it were a shop for women, maybe, my spirit never broke. I swore to myself, gender doesn't matter. I'll prove that true passion can move people's hearts. Of course, the road wasn't easy, but I will never forget the day my first customer, upon receiving the bike I had restored, said with tears in their eyes, "It's like my dream has taken shape." And this house. Even the day the real estate agent hesitated, saying, "A house like this just for a single woman," I didn't waver. I spread out my flawless business plan and said, I'm the CEO of a company that sells dreams. Someone who can't make her own dream come true could never help others achieve theirs. That's why I'll make this castle mine. The walls of this house are proof of my unwavering conviction. This entire space is the physical trace of 20 years of my dreams. That's exactly why, I whispered, staring at my reflection in the window pane. I'm no longer at an age where I need protection. It's time to protect what's mine, with my own hands. This house is my soul. I'll never let anyone take it away for the sake of convenience or emotion. A fierce flame of determination burned within me. 2 weeks had passed since that stormy dinner. The barrage of messages from my family had stopped as suddenly as it began. Perhaps they had finally realized how unreasonable their demands were and given up. That faint hope began to grow in me, until that Saturday morning. I woke to the deafening roar of a truck engine and looked out the window in disbelief. A massive moving truck was parked in my driveway. From its cargo hold, familiar sofas and dining tables were being unloaded by movers one after another. And there, standing with her arms crossed, directing it all like the mistress of my home, was my sister, Elise. The sofa goes right in the center of the living room, and those boxes over there, take them to the kids' rooms. Be careful not to scratch anything, handle them gently. Beside her, Cole stood with his arms crossed, looking uncomfortable, while the two children stood frozen, bewildered and anxious. I opened the front door still in my bathrobe and stepped in front of them. Elise, what on earth are you doing here? At my shout, the mover's hands froze mid-motion. Elise turned to face me slowly, as if she had been expecting my arrival. There was not a trace of remorse on her face. Instead, she wore a calculating smile that seemed to say, "About time you showed up." "Oh, good morning. As you can see, we're moving in. From now on, our family will be living here." Her brazen attitude stole the breath from me for a moment. She actually intended to seize this house. She truly believed that by physically moving in, I would be forced to give in. I swallowed my anger and with a freezing calm, addressed the bewildered movers first. "Excuse me, which moving company are you with?" The foreman-looking man answered suspiciously. "Always moving company, but..." "I see," I nodded. "Everyone, listen carefully. This land and the building are the personal property of me, Vanessa Clark. The couple standing there have unlawfully entered my private property without my permission." The workers' expressions changed. The foreman glanced between Cole and me. "Hey, what's the deal here, Cole? Didn't you say your sister had approved this move?" "Well, that's... Cole stammered and looked to Elise for help. Elise blushed red and shouted, "She is my sister. This is a family matter, so it's none of your business." That statement was the clincher. I quietly took out my smartphone. "If any of you set foot on my property another step, I will call the police right now. The charge will be criminal trespass. You movers are committing an offense in the act." "Police. Criminal trespass." In the act, the words I spoke had a devastating effect. The foreman of the moving crew, with a professional instinct, immediately realized this was not a simple family spat and that they must not be dragged into a legal mess. "Everyone, stop. Put the furniture back on the truck. Hurry." Ignoring Elise's panicked cries, the foreman apologized to me. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. We'll withdraw immediately. We'll bill Mr. Cole for today's dispatch fee at a later date." Within 10 minutes, the truck had gone, leaving only Elise and Cole standing there in stunned silence, and me staring at them with a cold gaze. The first round was entirely mine. Elise exploded in anger over the failed plan, but Cole restrained her. "Stop it, Elise. Let's go back to Dad and Mom's place for now. We'll rethink the plan." Rethink the plan. Those words proved, beyond doubt, that they had not given up on taking this house. Cole dragged Elise into the car, and they sped away as if fleeing. As they left, Elise glared at me through the window with a snake-like, vengeful stare. After they were gone, I began to act at once. I called the security company and set the motion detection sensitivity on the cameras to maximum. Then I went to the garage and gently placed my hand on my beloved Harley. It's okay. If they lay a finger on you, I'll make them pay a price that won't stop at a single finger. That night, my premonition came true in the worst possible way. An emergency alert flashed on my phone. Warning, suspicious motion detected in the garden area. I checked the surveillance footage on my study PC and saw Elise and Cole, both dressed all in black. They were using shovels to destroy the flower beds I had painstakingly cultivated. When they finished ravaging the garden and sighed in satisfaction, Cole suddenly pointed toward the garage shutter. On the screen, I could clearly see a devilish smile spread across Elise's face. Garden damage isn't enough, is it? They approached the garage with metal bars in hand and smashed the control panel for the electronic lock mounted on the wall. Finally, they kicked and struck the shutter again and again at the height where my Harley surely stood. Hearing those blows, my blood ran cold and I was seized by an urge to rush out and beat them senseless. But I forced myself to restrain that impulse in front of the monitor. It was not the time for me to go out. If I ran out there now, they would twist it all into nothing more than a family dispute. This wasn't where the battle would be won. I clenched my teeth and waited in silence, waited for their foolish rampage to end completely, and for this footage to become what it needed to be. Finished, irrefutable evidence. The next morning, I was at the office of my company's legal advisor, Nathan Brooks. After he finished watching the surveillance footage on the large monitor, he spoke quietly, his voice laced with anger. This is terrible. It's far beyond a family quarrel. Vanessa, if you want, we can have them sent to jail. I nodded calmly. Yes, Nathan. This is a clear crime. So let their punishment be carried out properly, through legal and official channels. I explained the plan I had prepared in advance. First, I'll file a police report, along with this flawless video evidence. They'll be summoned for questioning on charges of property damage and trespassing. I see. So you'll start by mobilizing the authorities. Exactly. And at the same time, you'll send them a civil notice for damages. The claim amount is $4,000. If they refuse to pay, then we move to the next step. I'll release an edited version of the footage on my company's social media as a public warning about criminal activity in the neighborhood. Nathan gave a sly smile. Official legal pressure on the surface and the threat of public exposure underneath. You really do know how to fight. I'm not fighting because I want to, but if it's to protect my castle, I'll become the devil itself. That afternoon, I went to the police station. After reviewing the footage I submitted, the detective said, "This is serious. We'll begin the investigation immediately and summon the suspects for questioning." A week later, the storm struck the Miller family. From what I heard, officers visited their home in the morning and Elise and Cole were escorted into the patrol car for voluntary questioning. A few hours later, when the two of them returned home, utterly exhausted from the interrogation, the mail carrier arrived. In his hand was a thick, certified letter addressed for personal delivery only. Cole accepted it with trembling hands, opened it in the living room, and the color drained completely from both their faces. The documents scattered across the table bore the heading, "Claim for Damages, Amount $4,000, and contained a number of horrifying evidentiary photographs from that night. My mother picked up one of the photos and collapsed into tears on the spot. The letter ended with a cold, concise line from Nathan Brooks. "If no sincere response is received within 72 hours, we will execute all legal measures, including publication of the evidence footage." The next afternoon, I received a weak phone call from my mother. "Vanessa, please reconsider. If Elise and Cole are arrested, Dylan and Tessa will be labeled children of criminals for the rest of their lives. Are you seriously saying you want your beloved nephew and niece to face that future?" As expected, my mother ultimately brought up kids. Her absolute sense of justice centered on the future of those dear grandchildren of hers. In the face of that distorted love, the magnitude of the harm I suffered became a trivial matter. I responded calmly but firmly to that reality. It is not I who is trying to ruin the grandchildren's future. It is Elise and Cole who committed the crime. Mom, you still don't understand who the real perpetrators are, do you? But those children will suffer. Enough. I cut my mother off. If you truly care about your grandchildren, there is only one thing you should do. Make them properly pay for the crimes they committed. Before my mother could say anything further, I ended the call and blocked her number. After that phone call, all contact from the Miller family ceased entirely. Shortly after 11 p.m., with less than an hour left on the deadline, a short message arrived on my phone from Cole. "We understand. We will pay the money." A single line, a dry fact announcing their complete surrender. Thus, the battle over my castle concluded with my total victory. The next day, I heard from acquaintances that the Miller household had been thrown into chaos trying to raise the $4,000. Elise and Cole naturally begged our parents for help. However, our parents steadfastly refused to hand over the savings they had set aside for their old age in cash. "You reap what you sow," they said. They may have loved their grandchildren, but they did not have the resolve to touch their precious nest egg. In the end, Elise apparently sold the designer bags and jewelry her parents had given her before marriage to a pawn shop for next to nothing to scrape together the money. For a proud woman like her, that must have been a humiliation worse than death. But that was the just consequence for someone who tried to steal another person's castle. A few days later, I confirmed that exactly $4,000 had been deposited into my bank account. On the same day, Nathan Brooks's office sent me copies of the signed affidavits from Elise and Cole. "I hereby vow to never approach the residence or place of employment of Vanessa Clark again." That single sheet of paper drew an eternal borderline between them and me. That weekend, I raised a modest solitary toast. I cooked a steak and opened a bottle of wine. I opened the window facing the garage and quietly lifted my glass toward my beloved bike, resting in the quiet. "Cheers to our castle." At that moment, a final message from Elise arrived. "I never want to see your face again." I couldn't help but laugh at that one line. What a coincidence. "Me neither," I murmured, then removed her contact completely from my life. A year passed, and calm days flowed through my castle. One clear Sunday afternoon, while I was polishing my perfectly restored Harley in the garage, my mother sent a short message. "I'm nearby." I replied, "Only for 5 minutes." And soon a sedan quietly pulled up in front of the house, and my mother stepped out alone. She stood before me across the gate, the borderline between us, and managed in a strained voice, "What a lovely house. I can see all your hard work is in it." After a pause, she seemed to gather her courage and slipped a small paper bag through the gap in the gate toward me. Elise made this for you." She said no more, hurried back to her car, and left. Inside the paper bag was an imperfect homemade apple pie and a single card. On the card, written in a childlike, clumsy hand, was the single word, "I'm sorry." The pie brought back the memory that it had once been my mother's specialty and my favorite. Surely Elise had, while learning from our mother, clumsily tried many times until she finally managed it. I took a bite of the pie. It was sweet and just a little salty. Looking up at the sky, it was clear and endlessly blue. I swung my leg over my bike in the garage and started the engine. From my castle onto a new road. The future has only just begun.